Welcome back to Visited by Voices Live. It is Thursday the 10th, if you're watching this live. Otherwise, it's whenever you are watching it. I'm joined today to discuss the filmography of Tobe Hooper with Al and Piz. How are you, gentlemen?
How you doing, Lauren? Thanks for having us on.
Hola, ¿cómo está ustedes?
Mi bien.
Bueno.
¿Y tú?
Bueno, sí.
So does that count as, now we can put this up as a bilingual episode?
Sí.
I can have a few different subtitles added to the bottom and see if that actually gets more views.
Si habla español, bueno.
Un poco.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Al is just very quiet right this second.
This is a deep discussion, Tobe Hooper. I gotta get all my thoughts in order, and you know.
Al, yo hablo español.
Say what?
Yo hablo español.
I only speak Russian and English, Piz. Sorry, man.
Kokaze?
I can teach you guys Russian.
The only Russian I know is vodka.
Niet.
That's all you need to know.
That's it. Just tell everyone no all the time or get drunk. That's it.
That's it.
So the reason I really wanted to do a show on Tobe Hooper is because I think he's one of those filmmakers that it's easy to think of just the highest points of the career and just kind of forget that the man had a really distinguished career, at least up until the money started getting thin. And when you look at his body of work, you realize there haven't been many people in the entire history of horror that really can stand up to his towering work. But yet, it's funny, you hear names like Wes Craven and John Carpenter all the time, and I'm not denigrating either of them, but Hooper tends to be mentioned only after the titles of his films that people cherish. And I think that's something we need to start fixing as a conversation. Piz, I know the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is your favorite film, correct?
It is my favorite horror film. That's true. Yes.
It's not your favorite film overall?
Gosh, that's very, I don't, yeah. I can't pin down a favorite. It's just too difficult.
That's fair. Al, what?
It's in my top three. Yeah, I mean, you know, if you ask me right now, my top three would be one, Alone in the Dark, 1982. Piz did a review on it. I just love that movie for some reason. Great cast. Halloween, and number three, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Absolutely, that was actually the second horror movie that I've seen as a, you know, the first time I watched a horror movie, I think I was like 12, 11. It was Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, and I fell in love with horror. And then I rented Texas Chainsaw Massacre because when I was in the VHS section of the video store, I seen the cover and I'm like, oh man. And you know, when the movie started, I was a young kid. I thought Franklin was going to end up being the killer because he kind of looked like leather, you know, like Gunnar did on the cover, you know, kind of like dressed the same. And, you know, but then, man, I mean, I couldn't sleep for like 4 nights. So yes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, my third favorite film. It's an absolute masterpiece. And, you know, there's nothing that compares to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
And the reason I asked about Texas Chainsaw to begin with, although we will start with a few things before that, is just because it seems that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is kind of one of the defining titles of the entire genre. Mm-hmm. It's impossible, I think. Listen, you can like horror and not like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that the emotions that horror evokes are so strong in that particular work that it's sort of this undeniable pillar of the genre. And I think it's only grown over time, which is actually really rare in this field. Normally, films find their plateau and they stay there. This thing just keeps getting to be more iconic and has not lost any of its ferocity. Mm-hmm. Would you guys agree?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And it never will, Lauren. I mean, look, when it come out, what's it been, 45 years now or more, or 40 years?
I believe it's been 46 years.
Yeah, 40 years from now, people are still going to look back. It's always going to be there. Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just like Halloween, I respect the other films. It's in a league of its own. I would say it's a film in a film of its own, in a league of its own. Just, I mean, you know.
Now that you say that, I desperately want to see the Leatherface girls softball team. It's in a league of its own.
Mm-hmm.
So
that would be interesting.
Tobe Hooper's career actually started a couple years before Texas Chainsaw Massacre. His first film was an experimental film that I don't think has really seen the light of day in any practical form, called Eggshells, which has been described as a hippie experimental film with no narrative. I've never seen the film, and I'm not sure I'd go out of my way for it because it does not sound like it's right down my alley at all.
It's on the Arrow Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 limited edition release. That and what the other short film he did, what's it called, The Grifters, or I forget, but it's on that set. I saw it years ago, and yes, it's experimental.
I'm actually with you, Lauren. I have never seen it.
Yeah, well, I mean,
not yet.
Everyone knows that I kind of stick to my lane in the horror genre and don't stray too far. But that said, you know, if it was on and I would probably watch it. But without the days of passive television, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But Tobe Hooper actually got his big break in a way immediately after that, because that was 1969. He actually directed a documentary for Peter, Paul, and Mary called The Song is Love for television. And it was a very, very successful television property, which is probably about as far removed. But you're starting to see a common theme in his early work was that there was kind of a representation of the summer of love and that hippie era. And I think what's brilliant is in 1974, he turns that completely on its head. Because there is no film that represents the death of the hippie era more than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Al, when was the first time you say it was one of the first films you saw? How old were you, and what were your initial impressions?
It was the second horror movie I've ever seen in my life. I was about 12 or 13. The first horror movie was Dream Warriors, and after that, I completely fell in love with horror. And I went to the video store and went right to the horror section. And I'm browsing through, and I'm just like, my mind's just like going 1,000 miles an hour. I'm like, oh my God, like what am I going to rent? Like, I'm looking at all these titles, and I didn't understand. I mean, 12 years old, you know, I'm 36 now. I didn't understand horror back then, or, you know, I just knew I loved it. Like, I loved the way it made me feel. I loved everything about it. It put me in, like, watching horror put me in like a different zone. It just made me feel things. It was like orgasmic, like almost like having sex with a woman. It was like horror is like it was like in my heart after watching it just one time. So the second, you know, when I came across the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I seen the cover and I'm like, oh my God, you know, I'm like, is that a woman hanging on a meat hook? And then there's a guy with a chainsaw. I'm looking at his face. I'm like, you know what? Let me, you know, and I turned, you know, I read the back and I'm like, let me give this a shot. So I went home, put it in VCR, turned the lights off, and like, I guess about 20-25 minutes into it, I'm like, whoa, like what the, you know, and then, you know, Leatherface opens the door and cracks Alan over the head with you know, sledgehammer, and I'm just like, oh my God, like it just, when that movie got done, like I was just, my jaw was just dropped. I'm like, oh, did this really happen? Like, you know, and you know, it was just, I couldn't even sleep for like a couple nights, you know, and I was just like, that movie really, really like completely terrified me. You know, it was, and to this day, it's, you know, it doesn't give me that same feeling, but it's still such a great horror movie. I mean, you just look at it and it's just like perfect in every way, you know, and you know, you have people who say, well, it wasn't as bloody and this and that, but it doesn't need to be. It still terrorized people. It's still, I mean, for God's sakes, a month ago, and I sent Piz the link, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, used the theme from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre in one of his political ads targeting Joe Biden. And I couldn't believe it when I seen it. You know, I don't even know where that came from or what popped in his head, but Texas
I'm
Chainsaw
sure that was a
Massacre,
25-year-old intern.
Yeah.
probably, but I mean, my God, that movie, it's a masterpiece, and it's
Oh, it's
always
part of
going
the
to be.
culture. It's part of the culture, definitely. So, Piz, I'm sure you've told the story before, but you're going to have to tell it again. Your first viewing of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I actually watched it kind of late, to be honest, because when I was a kid going to the video store with mom, all of the big franchises were out of the question. And even when Friday the 13th and Nightmare and all those were introduced, Chainsaw was still off the table. Because I can remember my mother vividly saying, I'm not going to let you rent some movie and watch people getting cut to pieces with a chainsaw. So there was already something taboo about it. And just the name, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is so evocative. You just imagine an out and out bloodbath. So it was already taboo. But for some reason, I did not rent it for the longest time. I was probably in middle school, and I rented the media VHS release with that just amazing cover art on it and the Rex Reed quotes on top of it.
Yeah.
And I took it home. I watched it in the middle of the day, and it was unlike any horror movie I'd ever seen before. It was so raw and so ferocious, and yet really stylish. It really took me off guard. I mean, I was in love with it. I fell in love with it immediately. There's something about it. I mean, it's just that there's so much about that movie. We could just talk about it for hours, but it's so raw and ferocious and dirty and smelly and sweaty. And it just gets under your skin. And I mean, it plays tricks on your mind because you think it is a bloodbath, and it's not a bloodbath at all. I don't know. It's such a, I don't know. It's really, I think, one of the most powerful films the horror genre has to offer.
I think the thing that's so amazing about it is that film has texture.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like an old burlap bag or like a dusty road. You can feel that the asphalt on the road is baking. You can.
Oh yes.
I don't have a sense of smell, but I can smell that movie.
You can smell as soon as it opens on the armadillo carcass, and then you're passing all those open fields and those cows and the cow drooling, and then you get into the van and you've got the sweaty, stinky hippies. I mean, you feel the heat, you can smell the sweat, you can smell the cow manure and the decay in the air.
And it's one of those films that it seems to do it seamlessly. In other words, it doesn't feel like a stage ever. It feels like someone threw a camera down in this incredibly hostile environment. In a way, it almost feels like a war movie in that way, because it's so immediate and it's so forceful in its perspective.
Mm-hmm. You can almost get lost in the movie, almost like you're watching, I hate to say a documentary, but I mean, it just, the movie just consumes you. Even now when I watch it, it's like just the rest of the world just kind of fades away. And you know, I did not want to see the film on Blu-ray when it first came out on Blu-ray, because I felt like it would be too clean. Like the grain would no longer be there. I want to see that film on a VHS tape that's washed out and that's been played and rewound 100 times. I want to see the damage, and you know what I mean? It just becomes part of that film's, the fabric of that film.
But thankfully, because it was shot on Super 16,
right,
it retains the look no matter how much they clean it up. And I've actually become a big proponent of this film as an example of why film restoration is important.
Mm.
Because I think it is a film that looks dirty and muddy, and it feels of its time, and it feels all of its limitations, and kind of weaponizes all of its limitations towards the end. But it all works because of its limitations. So I felt that same fear that you felt. And then I saw the Blu-ray, the Dark Skies Blu-ray. That was that issue that I was actually most afraid of, but bought. And I felt that cleaned up, it was not hurt a bit. And that's a powerful film, because there's other films that I've seen that I've liked that have lost some power when they've gotten cleaned up. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a film that, again, like Piz said, we could talk about all night. And I wouldn't even mind that. But he has a long discography. And the thing about his work is people do get hung up on his first mainstream title. But, it's funny because 2 years later, he releases Eaten Alive. And Eaten Alive is a bizarre Southern Gothic flick with, I think, some of the most outrageous, over-the-top moments and performances of the entire era. Neville Brand is the obvious choice, but I mean, you have just that cast is absolute goldmine of bizarro talent.
They all had to be on serious psychotropic drugs. There's no doubt. That movie's even more. I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an insane movie. Eaten Alive is off the charts insane.
Right, and there's always someone on screen who is commanding your attention like no one's business. It is a performance movie, which I guess you wouldn't expect coming off of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is about feel and texture and emotion and atmosphere. You walk out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre feeling like you just came out of a heat dream, Mm-hmm. Whereas Eaten Alive, although it has atmosphere, it's really about all those bizarre characters going as wild as possible. Al, have you seen Eaten Alive?
I did, Lauren. It's been a while. I have to revisit it. It's been a long, long time. But from what I remember, I enjoyed it.
I would definitely recommend revisiting it.
Yeah, it's been a while.
You've got Neville Brand, who was apparently drunk the entire time they were shooting that movie.
And all the better for it.
All the better for it. You've got a young Robert Englund as Buck, who's ready to, I'll let you fill in the blank, who's over the top also. That was, of course, when Robert met Tobe and they started their relationship. Marilyn Burns is back from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah, that movie, it's not one that I revisit a lot, but whenever I do, I find myself just being so entertained by how oddball and off the wall, and it's almost I don't know, it's almost like some sort of free form. It's like Tobe just set up a camera, gave everybody a handful of mushrooms, and said, "Just go."
Yeah, I mean, look at this cast: Neville Brand, Mel Ferrer, Carolyn Jones, Marilyn Burns, William Finley. I mean, the Phantom of the Paradise is in this movie. Stuart Whitman, Kyle Richards, Robert Englund. It's like it was a film that had it come out 2 decades later, people would say, "Oh, they cast that thing at a horror convention."
Yeah,
but it wasn't. It was just that's who was kind of floating around that circle at that time in that part of the world. It's not a particularly brutal movie, especially compared to Chainsaw, but it has this unforgettable style to it, and it showed that Hooper was more than just to put the camera down and have disturbing things happen in front of the camera, which for a while before VHS was kind of the reputation. TCM was a midnight movie that was still out there making the rounds. The prints were getting really beaten up and torn up, but they were still making the rounds. But most people hadn't seen it. They only knew the reputation. So it was thought of as this ultra-violent, ultra-gory dare movie. So certainly coming into the next feature, Eaten Alive, people's expectations were not where the film that he delivered was. And we are joined by Jonathan Lundy. How are you, sir?
What up, homies?
Hey, man.
I do want to add one more thing about Texas Chainsaw Massacre before we go on.
Sure.
Because this is part of the reason why I love it so much. For me, Chainsaw is the first contemporary American slasher film. To me, that movie created the watermark for everything that's pretty much every slasher movie that's followed it. So I think it's probably the most influential horror movie of the past of ever.
I might go with Psycho in that category, but I think when we're talking at that high of stakes, your point is well made. I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is just it is the bowling ball that set down the aisle of all the other movies. You know, it knocked everything in its path over and made everyone say, you know what, you think you can disturb people? No, this is disturbing. This is the real thing.
Well, and you mentioned its reputation. It still has that reputation. It's still looked at as I had to beg my girlfriend to watch it because she kept saying, I don't want to see, it's going to be gory, it's going to disturb me, it's going to be all blood and guts. And I said, two of those three things are completely wrong. There's no blood and guts, it's not gory, it will disturb you. And so she finally watched it, and at the end of it, she was like, I really felt bad for Leatherface. I wish she would have killed everybody.
It's a good girlfriend.
It's good.
Jonathan, so why don't you give us your feelings on Chainsaw and Eaten Alive? That's as far as we've gotten, so go for it.
Chainsaw is like a landmark horror film for me, as it is for so many people. But I've actually told Lauren this like off air. Chainsaw affected me in a way that like it's come up in therapy in later life. I had a very, very deep infatuation with that film and the lore behind it growing up. I remember IFC used to play it randomly about once a week at like 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and I would just be terrified that it was going to be on TV. So I watched Chainsaw in sections over like probably a year or 2 years. And once I pieced it all together and it wasn't nearly as gory as I thought, that's when I really got my love for horror movies. But it is just, like I said, it shaped me in a way that, like I said, that it later in life, it's affected me.
What was it about it that disturbed you so much?
It wasn't even the movie. Actually, watching the movie was that was sort of the medicine for it. Like that was the cure, was to watch it. Whatever I'd had in my head just from hearing about that film or seeing like action figures or whatever at local shops with Leatherface, I just knew this had to be the worst thing ever put to film. It must be the most graphic thing ever created. Plus there was the whole, it was based on a true story or whatever. Right. I was pretty young, 12, 13. But it actually kickstarted, like I'm diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and that's actually kind of what kickstarted this. So like it has affected me in a very different way. But I have a love for it just because of that, because there's never been another film in my life that's ever affected me like that, good or bad.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all part of its reputation too, is the fact that, it really happened. It really happened. Because I remember hearing that too. Oh yeah, well my cousin did time with Leatherface. It really happened, and it's based on, of course, Ed Gein, who Psycho, Norman Bates was based on. But So that's and there's still people who believe that it really happened. It's based on a true story. The poster says it. The poster wouldn't lie.
Yeah, they can't lie in a movie.
You mean the movie lied? Yeah. So I realized that I asked you guys about your first time watching it, but I never really discussed my first time. So this is going to mirror you kind of frighteningly, Piz. But there was, in our local video store, which was called Popcorn Video, it had a horror section in the corner. It was a single, probably 6 foot by, I don't know, however tall the ceiling was, section of horror films. And there was everything you'd expect in it. Although these were early days for video stores and VHS in general. And there was only a few films my parents were really adamant that I not be able to rent. There was a lot of the Italian films, especially the Fulci titles. For some reason, they got a bad vibe from it. Maybe because they proudly stated they were unrated. Maybe it was the big boxes, which made them look like pornography. Whatever it was, they were not going to let me near the Fulci. And then there was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, my father has done he was a mechanic, but he did a lot of work. And one of the things he would do is if a tree went down somewhere on their property and they didn't want it, he'd go cut it up, bring it home, and that was firewood for us. So once, however, my dad actually cut his leg with a chainsaw. He used too large of a saw for too small of a cut, went too far, and nothing huge. He didn't cut off his leg by any means, but he had stitches. And I remember it being this crazy day, whereas everyone was running around screaming. So I think that there was just this real sense of the chainsaw itself as a weapon was just very taboo. Now, they didn't realize that chainsaws were used in other horror movies that I had seen, but the movie was just off limits. And for my 13th birthday, my parents went away for the night. This was actually the night before my birthday. They were there for my birthday, but the night before. And my sister snuck out and rented the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as my birthday gift. So at 13, I sat down and watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with all this buildup, all the history, because I already had the books. I had reference books and everything. I already knew the mythology around this film. But I also had all these years of being told no. And that story could easily come to a bad ending, whereas it disappointed. But it didn't. And although I slept fine that night, that night did change me. It did have a profound change in me. So what about Eaten Alive, Jonathan?
I actually just recently picked up Eaten Alive on DVD. I haven't even got a chance to see it yet.
Oh, have fun with that. It's a crazy movie.
Don't take any drugs prior to watching it.
I figured that would enhance the experience.
No. That movie's a drug in and of itself.
You will be overdosed if you add anything additionally to it.
Now, let me ask you guys. I mean, Eaten Alive looks like, I mean, just from what I've seen and like the cover and everything in the DVD, it looks the most stylistically close to the original Texas Chainsaw. Is that the case?
It shares some similarities in that. I mean, it's got this very kind of raw look and feel, and it's very ferocious, but it's
like a Looney Tunes cartoon, awesome at the same time.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to, I've said this before. Sometimes I think because none of Tobe Hooper's movies looked like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre ever again, I feel like I don't know if all of that style in that original movie was intentional or if it was part of circumstance. If he would have made that movie 2 years earlier or 2 years later, maybe a couple people on set aren't the same people, would it have still turned out that way? Because I just don't feel like maybe that was his whole vision. That was just part of how that came together.
So film is a collaborative art form. Time and a place, everyone working for cheap or no money because they were just, broke. Everyone's really desperate. Everyone wants to make a name for themselves. They're not in Hollywood. They're not in California. They're not in New York where, there's film scenes. They're at like a third-rate film school in Texas trying to make something that would give them a name. There's a lot to be said for being hungry. I just think it's lightning in a bottle, a time and a place. I've said before on my autopsy video on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I think also there was a real sense of end of the world almost in the late 70s, or as we approached the late 70s. The Summer of Love was gone. Charles Manson had murdered the hippie generation, basically, and what remained was desperate and ugly of that generation. And we were heading towards this ultra-capitalistic world, whereas the globe was shrinking. We were having fuel crises for the first time. The American families were facing divorce at a rate they'd never seen before. Boundaries were being pushed in film. Pornography was hitting multiplexes in nice neighborhoods. There was a lot going on that made everyone feel like, as the Ramones sang, it was the end of the century, the end of the world. It was very much a very apocalyptic film, in my view. It feels like the end of the world.
The gas crisis was very much on Toby's mind. I remember an interview in which he talked about, well, what do we do if there's no more gas? What happens if there's no more gas? I mean, the world's just going to end, right?
Definitely. Now, let me ask you a question that occurred to me, and I don't know if any of you have thought about this. In some ways, I feel like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 feels more like a stylistic sequel to Eaten Alive than it does to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That anarchy, that sense of humor, that outrageous satire, it's all there.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to see it.
I would have. I've never really looked at it as a follow-up to Eaten Alive, though. I've always looked at Chainsaw 2 as Toby's answer to the reputation of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Nobody saw the humor in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but everybody saw the blood and gore. but there was no blood and gore, and there was humor and satire in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So Tobe was like, "You want gore? Here it is. Here's the satire. I'm going to turn up to 10. Everything's going to be in your face. This is what you thought you were getting with the first film. Right in your face."
So Tobe Hooper then has a dark period after Eaten Alive, literally, because he gets hired to direct a film called The Dark. He's fired from the production, and John Cardos completes it. Now, if you've seen The Dark, it's hard to figure out what of Tobe Hooper remains in it, because it is just not of the caliber of the work that he had been doing up to that point. And while I think it's possible to enjoy The Dark, it feels like a programmer from the time.
I've not seen it.
Don't go out of your way.
I haven't checked.
I think it's one of those films that you can see free on any number of services for a reason. In fact, it might be a film that the copyright has pretty much been abandoned on, which happens when corporations go out of business and no one wants to untangle it because there's not enough money on the other side. But it remains kind of the beginning of a trend in his career as well, which is that he kind of rubs against his producers, not always in the best way. And we'll come to a film that's kind of infamous for that shortly. But in 1979, however, he directs the most successful miniseries of the year, in the form of Salem's Lot. Now, I didn't see the miniseries version of Salem's Lot first. I saw it on VHS, so I saw the cut down movie version of it. It wasn't until many years later I saw the miniseries version. And while I think the miniseries version is a little leisurely, to be honest with you, I do prefer it to the movie version, which seems too condensed. What's your guys' experience with Salem's Lot?
I don't remember which one I saw first. I want to guess I probably saw the film version first, like on VHS. But I love Salem's Lot. And I think it still holds up. I watched it again recently on Blu-ray, and there's some stuff in it that's very much of its time. But I think the little kid coming through the window that they shot in reverse. I mean, awesome. That works. Period. I don't care what decade we're in. That works. I don't know. I love the movie.
Yeah, me too. It's been a while. I have to revisit it, but I remember it's been at least 10 plus years since I've seen Salem's Lot, but I remember I really liked it.
I think it's one of those movies that it's interesting because everyone tuned in for the Stephen King and they stayed for Hooper's visuals. Mm-hmm. Because it is a purely visual experience. It really isn't a plot movie in any serious sense. It is look at how gorgeous every shot of this is. And this was made for television.
Yeah.
How the world has changed.
Well, and you talked about how Hooper butted heads with the producers. The producers wanted to make this a feature-length film, and Tobe said, "There's no way we can tell this story in 90 minutes or 2 hours. There's no way. We can't do it. We just can't do it." So they said, "Okay, let's do it, and let's make it a miniseries." But they wanted to make that just a 90-minute movie, and Tobe said no, and they said, "Okay," shockingly, But
different time.
Yeah,
that would never happen today. Things are pre-sold at length before they're even made now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep. No doubt about it.
The look of the van. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I can't imagine that. 90 minutes of that. I don't think you could. You could, but I mean, it would be like the Dark Tower movie that we got a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's a disappointment.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to derail this into Dark Tower, but the problem with that is you can't tell that story. It's not an appropriate story for film. Period. People say, "Oh, well, if they took their time, if they made 8 movies," no, it still wouldn't work. It is something that works wonderful as a pulp novel series. It doesn't translate. It just won't.
That movie did not translate. That's for sure.
And I don't think there's really a way to do it, to be honest with you. Not and keep it what it is. If you reinvent it entirely, sure, because then you're just creating something new.
Yeah.
But
Sorry, Jonathan. What were you? Sorry, Jonathan.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like the look of the vampire. Was it Kurt Barlow? Is that it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Was it Barlow?
Yes. Well,
Okay. Man, that scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. But I mean, that was some really good work. I felt like. I mean, like I saw better copies of it. You can tell a lot of it's really heavy makeup.
Mm-hmm.
But just watching it on old CRT TV on VHS back in the day, man, that stuff looked fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Nosferatu design. Yeah.
Why don't they go to that more, man? I feel like that's just not done a lot.
Blood Vessel. See Blood Vessel tonight after you're done with the stream.
Blood Vessel.
Yeah, Blood Vessel's good.
Blood Vessel goes right back for it. It brings vampires back into being monsters.
I was recommending Blood Vessel to somebody the other day. I don't remember who, but it's out there. It's good. It's fun. Yeah. Now, have you read the novel, Lauren?
Yeah.
Of course, Barlow in the novel is he's a human, and I mean he has dialogue, and he's a human.
Yeah.
I mean, he looks like a human. I should say.
It's much. I mean, in Dance Macabre, Stephen King put it very simply. He says, "I needed to put a book out. I love Dracula. I rewrote Dracula." I mean, it's what it is, and that's fine. It's again one of those examples. I think this does happen in King's career, where the films that come out, I think, are sometimes more remarkable than the novels. It's just rare for it to be early period King where it's happening.
Have you seen the other Salem's Lot with Rob Lowe in it?
I've seen much of it.
I like it a lot too.
I like the cast. I don't like. See, this weird thing happened later on after the heyday of the miniseries. So after the 90s were kind of out of the way, they started getting really into this idea of adapting King literally as much as they could for these adaptations. And there's a pitfall to that. Because King is great about character. He's great about scenes. But you have to put it in the context of a film for it to work. That's the reason why, like, the adaptation of The Shining, the second one, the miniseries version, just doesn't work, because any reasonable person would have said the mace, the animals, the tree animals won't work on film.
Yeah.
Any reasonable person would have known not to go there. But because they wanted to make these really, really accurate adaptations, all that stuff stayed in. And I think that's kind of that. There's a little bit of that hurts the second Salem's Lot miniseries. But yeah, it's way better than anything else adapted from King for television of that era. No question about it. Mm-hmm. 2 years later, The Funhouse. Now, The Funhouse is actually one of my favorite pieces of Hooper's catalog, because as everyone knows, I'm all about mood and atmosphere. And if you can make me feel like I'm in a place that I'd want to be, such as, a haunted attraction or a traveling carnival, you're 90% of the way to getting me to love your movie. I love how sleazy the carnival feels, how absolutely you feel guilty for watching children and young teens being at this place. It's just not a healthy place. And I love that Cooper was able to instill that in the movie. What's your guys' feelings on Funhouse?
Yeah, Funhouse was good, Lauren. It was really good.
I love it. I rewatched it just the other night.
Funhouse and Killer Clowns. No, good.
Oh, sorry. You cut up a little bit there, Al. I'm sorry. Yeah, I rewatched it just the other night, and I really think it's one of Hooper's better films that doesn't get mentioned a lot for some reason. You nailed it as far as the atmosphere and the mood of that film. There was a little carnival that used to roll through my town every October, and there was something about it that it attracted me to it, but at the same time, it scared the crap out of me, because I just thought of these carny people as like, these dirty nomads who just travel from town to town, and, they just live this very, dirty lifestyle. I don't know, the rickety rides, and, there was just something about the carnival that was very alluring, yet at the same time, very, scary. And the Funhouse captured that perfectly, I thought.
Jonathan? You frozen?
No,
You
no,
okay?
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, Funhouse really stands out to me between like felt like between 80 and like 82, 83. They were putting out all like anything that would stick as far as slashers go. And that one always really stuck out to me. You're right. I never really thought about the setting feeling so dingy and dirty and dangerous, honestly. But I mean, it works for that film. Plus, I mean, Tobe Hooper put some of the greatest boobs ever put to film in that movie. So
it's again such a beautiful. It's so well made and so well shot. And really well edited too. I actually I watched the making of on that Blu-ray, and Toby mentions that Verna Fields, who edited Jaws, actually took a swipe at editing the Funhouse, and some of the things that she added to it. She added the movie is not in stereo until you get inside the Funhouse, which opens up this whole other like spectrum of the movie, and that was her idea. So I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, I think it's exceptionally well made. It's got such a great look to it. It's got Hooper's signature kind of style, which is something that I always loved about Tobe's movies. Even some of the lesser ones, like you could tell if you were watching a Tobe Hooper movie. Now there's some at the end, toward the end, that there's some exceptions, but
We'll get them.
Yeah, he had a signature style that just identified a Tobe Hooper movie to me, almost instantly.
I can't tell you how much I love the opening of the movie. I love the fact that he conflates Halloween and Psycho directly, and then says, "Those things are a joke. They're the past. This is going to be what the future is." And you get to fetuses in jars and incestuous relationships being hinted at, which if you see the longer television version is more than a little, that it's a lot more than what's in the film hinted at. You get that ugly, dark, like you believe that carnival could come to your town. Now, not necessarily that there's a monster and a Frankenstein mask rolling around, but you could buy that there would be some real danger. Because I think didn't we all hear stories about the carnival that came to your town and how there was a kid that disappeared 7 years ago or something. And probably none of it happened. But we all heard those stories.
it's so believable, though.
Yeah,
Absolutely. It almost seems like the carnies live in a parallel culture, right? With parallel, like it's a certain lawlessness because they're never in the same place. So whose jurisdiction would it even be?
Yeah.
So I think Hooper captured all that. And the other thing I want to say about this film is that at this time, the slasher film, which I think it marginally is, because I think the slasher is more of a traditional monster in some ways. But the slasher film at that point was at a weird crossroads because the stuff that was making money was the less creative stuff by 82, 83, 84. And the more traditional, like standard cookie cutter stuff was making the money. So what's interesting is you have a film like Funhouse or a film like Hell Night come out that have all this style and all this actual production value, and they didn't make the inroads that any number of cheap slashers made. And that's kind of the hint that eventually the industry wouldn't know what to do with Hooper when this film didn't do what it probably should have.
I've never thought of the Funhouse as a slasher.
And again, I think of it as a very traditional monster film on a level, just with a really sleazy setting.
Yeah.
But on paper, it should be a slasher film.
Yeah. Well, and let's not forget, based on a novel by Dean Koontz, so of course that makes it great, right?
Sort of.
Right. Yeah.
There's no. Yeah.
Yeah. The movie came first, then the Koontz novel. The novel that Koontz wrote, he wrote it under a pseudonym, but then years later, he sort of accepted it as Dean Koontz. So now the novel is out as a Dean Koontz novel, and people think that the novel came first. It's funny.
Yeah. So a year later, he gets what arguably would be his most commercial opportunity, working for Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg had been developing a project called Dark Skies, and this was a pet project of his that came from the idea that what if Close Encounters of the Third Kind were a horror movie? Eventually, this would splinter off into two separate projects that could not be more dissimilar. One is E.T., the other was Poltergeist. Because they were going to shoot simultaneously, however, he wasn't going to direct both. So he played a producer role on Poltergeist, and he directed E.T. Now, for, cash, if cash is the ultimate king in Hollywood, he made the right choice. However, Poltergeist in its own right was a huge hit. But the film that we saw on screens and the film that we push play on whenever we put that disc in the tray is very different than the film that Tobe Hooper set out to make. The original screenplay was a lot harder. It was definitely R-rated. It featured demonic rape and real threats to the children, as well as some fairly hardcore gore sequences. All that, of course, got streamlined as Steven Spielberg's reputation became as a family-friendly director. What do you guys think of Poltergeist?
I love Poltergeist, the original. I'm not so much of a fan of two and they made a third one, right? Pretty sure I've seen it.
They did.
Yeah. The original, I love it. I absolutely love it. It kind of freaked me out when I first seen it. I was young, and I haven't watched it in a while, but I really, I remember it kind of freaked me out. I love that film. I can't say one negative thing about Poltergeist. Not at all.
I've never been a huge fan of Poltergeist. It's one of those movies that I rewatch every now and again just because I think like I should be more of a fan of it because it's a Tobe Hooper movie, but it's Tobe Hooper with kid gloves on, kind of, is how I feel about it. I still, and I know the controversy of, Tobe didn't direct it. It was Steven Spielberg directed it, whatever. When I watch that movie, I see enough Tobe Hooper there to make me think this is a Tobe Hooper movie. It's just sort of, again, there was a great interview with Lou Perryman from Chainsaw 2. He worked on
Rest in Peace.
Poltergeist. Yeah, rest in peace. And he mentioned how Spielberg was such a micromanager that he wouldn't let Tobe just make the movie that he wanted to make. He had to micromanage every little thing. And that's why the movie is kind of what it is. It's definitely not a bad movie. It's just not, I don't know.
I think that the truth is that Hooper directed the film. I think that like any producer, there was a lot of input from Spielberg, but then Spielberg took over the editing bay.
Right. Boom, you took what I was going to say. Yep.
And films are built in editing. There's no question. Anyone who's ever filmed anything and knows that what you put in raw footage is not what comes out the other side. And ultimately, when the decision was made that this was a tentpole film, that this was going to be a summer release, this was going to hit a mainstream audience, this was going to be as family-friendly as a haunted house film could be, the direction changed. And although he'd never shot any of the harder core elements that were originally in the screenplay and went as far as being storyboarded, it still was going to be a much rougher, rawer film than we eventually got. I will tell you, watch the film without listening to the music. Just put it on mute, and you already get a different experience. So Spielberg knew exactly how to play up the smooth, crisp, family-friendly aspects of the movie and to downplay the harder stuff, which I think is unfortunate ultimately. Jonathan, what do you think of the movie?
I love Poltergeist just because I saw it at a young age. It was a great film to kind of introduce me into like horror in general. So I watched it quite a bit growing up. As I got older and found out that it was directed by Tobe Hooper, who had also directed Chainsaw, I had a hard time believing it, and then looked into the backstory on it, and that's what I was going to say. I mean, you can definitely tell that Hooper directed the film, but it was definitely cut up in editing and put out as a Steven Spielberg picture. I feel like, especially the music, like you said, it just feels like E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
That clown, by the way, my God, that's.
Well, there's no bashing the art department. That's for sure.
No. Do you think that without Spielberg attached as producer, that they would have ever let Tobe Hooper do something that large?
Well, I'll tell you what. I think that had I'll go. I'm not going to answer that question because it was always Spielberg's thing. So who knows, right? But I think if Poltergeist had turned out differently, I think that Hooper may have been offered things like the Twilight Zone movie. You know, a segment in that. I think that because of the hostility between the two men, it did derail him to some degree. And I know that hostility might be a harsh word, but they didn't see eye to eye on the creative aspects of the film, clearly.
So you think that he could have turned out like a Landis? Had he have, played ball?
I don't know who that is.
We
don't say that name here.
Maybe more of a. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Spielberg handpicked him to direct the film because he loved Chainsaw Massacre, but then he takes the guy who directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and goes, "Whoa, whoa, you can't be come on,
you got to tone it down."
Yeah, you got to tone this down, man.
To be fair, I have read interviews with Spielberg where he talks about Salem's Lot being the film that made him think of him for this project, which makes a lot more sense, but it's still the guy who directed Eaten Alive and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah, right. It's a little bit ridiculous to think that he was the perfect choice for a PG rated, because remember, this is before the PG-13 existed. This was going to be a PG film by the time it got into production.
Well, Chainsaw was supposed to be a PG film.
That was just ignorance of what that movie was. But you're right. They didn't think Texas Chainsaw Massacre was ever going to get a real release when they made that film. You know, I mean, they were hoping for a regional release in drive-ins and a few grindhouses. They did not see that film taking off like it did.
Did you guys see Family Portrait? Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
yeah.
Family Portrait. Yeah. I love it. I just love the interviews, and everybody's young, and it's a shame we lost a lot of cast crew. But I love Family Portrait. I revisit it like once a month just to helps me like fall asleep listening to the Jim and young John Dugan. It's really interesting, and Ed O'Neill and his take and how he explains it. When he was at the University of Texas, and they're like, "Oh, they're shooting a movie." He's like, "Movie here? Kidding." Mm-hmm. And then he walks in the room, and they're like, "You guys here to audition for the movie?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." I love Family Portrait.
So the next thing after Poltergeist that comes across for Hooper is actually, I think, the most surprising thing in his entire filmography.
It's a fever dream.
Sorry. You're getting ahead of me. Because the next thing he does is the music video for Billy Idol's Dancing with Myself.
Oh, missed it.
Which, I mean, wow. I think the idea of Tobe Hooper and Billy Idol collaborating by itself is kind of, it feels like something a lie you'd tell your friends. Because it's a little bit too awesome for reality. But I mean, the music video has not aged well, but nothing from that period really has.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting that this, at that point, late 30s hippie kind of embraced this punk rocker trying to make pop music, and that kind of parallels his career in a way, right? Because he was the Texas Chainsaw guy who wanted to break into the mainstream with something like Poltergeist. And Billy Idol was exactly at that same point. He wasn't making Generation X records anymore. Yeah. So I just find it to be this wonderful parallel track. But the next thing he does after that is sign a 3-picture deal with Canon. And wow. So the next few years are kind of unbelievable, even by Canon standards. He was given real budgets, generally speaking, to make fairly unconventional films. He was allowed to release a film unrated in a market that wouldn't sustain it. He was also able, first off, to make a epic sci-fi horror bizarro feature called Lifeforce. Now, besides Matilda May, what do you guys remember, and what are your feelings about Lifeforce?
I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I think it's a beautiful looking movie. It's completely batshit crazy, but God, I love it because it is. You've got an amazing cast in that movie from top to bottom. Great cast. And the effects in the film, it's an epic. It's an epic movie, and the effects in the film, the bodies once they've had the life force sucked out of them, everything about that movie is so good. The production design, the sets, the effects, the acting. It's hard to believe that that's a canon movie, to be perfectly honest, but it's a freaking great movie. I can totally understand why it tanked back in the day, but I mean, it's just so off the wall, and space vampires, and
it's the kind of film that goes, oh, by the way, they're entering Halley's Comet in a space shuttle. Don't worry about it. Just go with it.
Yes.
Wait. Time out. You'll go with that, but the logic of aliens pisses you off.
Oh, do I have to explain this again? One film is asking us to take it super serious. The other film is like, we're on crack here. Just go with it.
You're right. The alien movie and the space vampire movie are both very serious. Sorry. Anyways, sorry.
Do you see? This is what Jonathan does. He derails everything with aliens again.
I have a shtick, and this is what the people expect from me. Okay.
The people. So, Al, what do you think of Lifeforce?
I never seen it. I have to check it out. Yeah, I have never seen it.
Just for Matilda May, watch it.
Matilda May is the cherry on top of that little sundae. Oh my! Matilda May is an incredibly beautiful woman who is incredibly naked throughout the majority of that film. If she's on screen, she's naked, and she's on screen a lot.
Yep, she's very.
That's not entirely true, but it's really close to true. She does have a clothed scene.
Does she have a? Oh well, yeah, but you can see through it though, right?
I fast forward through that part.
Does she ever see where she's wearing like some kind of very thin,
it's a robe thing,
silky thing? Yeah, like you can practically see through it. Yeah,
she's very smart. You
know. So it's a film where Patrick Stewart shows up, and you go, okay, why not? It's amazing that the film ever got made, because here's the thing, like, give me a synopsis of what the film is really about without smiling.
Space vampires. That's all I know it's about. Space vampires taking over the world. That's all I know.
London streets looking like firecrackers. I don't know.
Yeah, like some kind
helicopter. People turn to goo.
Yeah, with zombies running around. A vampiric lightning bolt going through the streets of London. Okay.
Why not? Why not?
That ending scene is for like, I saw it when I was like 10 years old. It's for like ever etched in my mind. And for years, I didn't know what that movie was. Where they're just both like impaled on something and everything's blowing up. Like that just stuck out. First of all, my uncle was watching it and I walked in, I saw Matilda May naked. I was like, hey, I want to watch this movie with you.
Yeah.
And I stuck around, but yeah.
So am I wrong to think that Steve Railsback could have had Nicolas Cage's career based on this film? Because he is wild too. That is a wild performance.
Yeah. It's all wild. It's just it's the kind of movie that could only have been made in the 80s by Canon, and of course because it's Canon, they're like, let's throw about 20 million at it or more.
Jeez, I was looking at 25 million.
Yeah.
But that's in 1985 dollars.
That's $85. It's a Canon movie. Canon, they didn't throw budgets like 25.
No, they were making things for $500,000.
25 million financed their entire year. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Looks like they made a cool 11 million back on that too.
Yeah.
But yet they double down and say, "Don't worry about it, Toby. Let's remake Invaders from Mars."
Mm-hmm.
Now, Invaders from Mars doesn't get talked about very often at all. It's Tobe Hooper's strange, almost kid-friendly, but completely psychedelic version of a 1950s. You can't even call it a classic. It's a programmer. The original is a programmer. It's an unremarkable 50s sci-fi flick. And the last 15 minutes of Hooper's film are like an acid trip. It's unbelievable what you will see when you watch this family-friendly film. What do you guys think about Invaders from Mars?
Again, I think it's a beautiful looking movie. The production design, the cinematography, the effects. It's a great looking, really well made movie that's very stylish. I'm not that big a fan of it. I like it. It's just not one that I reach for very often. It's kiddie, yet like you said, it's kiddie, but it's kiddie on a little bit of acid.
It's the high
Yeah, I
babysitter,
agree
right?
with Piz.
Something like that, yeah.
I agree with Piz. It's a while since I've seen it, but I agree with what Piz said. My sentiments exactly.
Yeah.
It's a weird one too because you can see money on screen.
Yes.
Again, it does not look like a Canon cheapie at all.
No, not at
But
all.
it has some great performances, although they're subdued performances, which is a little bit rare for a Hooper film.
Mm-hmm.
Not particularly a big fan of the kid, but the film is kind of very 85. Like the fact that it wasn't a big hit in 85 is really surprising to me because it seems like it would have been.
Yeah. I'm not sure if did it not get a big release. I mean, they put a lot of money into it, but they didn't give it a big release or something like that.
I can remember television commercials nonstop promoting it. Now,
Oh, wow.
keep in mind, they might have been UHF. I don't remember well enough, but I remember tons of promotion on the film. And I did see it in theaters. It did play my local theater, so it wasn't like a small release. But ultimately, it just couldn't overcome the hurdle of it being a little bit too weird, I think, for what it was.
Yeah.
A year later, I can't help but feel that Canon was like now grasping at straws. They thought they had hired a golden cow, or a golden goose to produce work that was going to really elevate their product line. And it really hadn't happened. I mean, maybe creatively it had, but as far as the bottom line box office, Tobe and Canon weren't paying off. So what do you do? Jonathan, what do you do?
You milk that cash cow.
And how do you do that?
You get the sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
That you do.
Do you feel like that was exactly what happened there? Because I was just about to bring that up. They lost so much money on those first two movies. They were like, here's the deal, Tobes. You're making Texas Chainsaw 2.
I think that's exactly what happened. But it's a bizarre choice because then they say, yeah, go ahead, release it unrated, which guaranteed it was going to make a third of what it could have had it come out with an R rating.
But what did it make on home video?
That's true. But here's the thing. Until recently, and I mean recently last, 15 years or so, it was not something that got licensed for television. I mean, it played cable. But I mean, it had a very limited revenue stream outside of, kind of a niche. Yeah. It was just too hard of a movie.
But it was such a video store staple, like well into the 90s. Like, I remember talking about that one with my buddies when I was young. I mean, good 10, 15 years after it was released.
So I'm sure this is going to seem like a love fest in a second. So before we talk about how much we love this movie, I find it really interesting, though. You see Hooper like kind of make his most socially political film of the bunch. It has a lot of reaction to what was perceived as Reaganomics. A lot of concerns about a shrinking middle class are explicitly made in the film. And it doesn't detract from the film because he's smart enough to play it as satire. It's not preachy, but he manages to get his point across. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it comes off as being part of the piece. So in a way, this over-the-top, gory, strange, Tobe Hooper chainsaw-wielding film is his most mature work up to this point. So, Al, what do you think of Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2?
I love it. I will say, it is, has that dark black comedy, element to it, but I love it. I really do. I love Dennis Hopper's performance. I love the beginning, where they're, where the two guys are driving down and they're shooting, and then, the Jeep, they cross over and they got the music playing in the background. That's part of the soundtrack. And then they encounter the Jeep later, and then the guy gets his head cut off, and everybody's at the radio station. I specifically love that radio station feel with Caroline Williams and the late Lou where they're in the station, and it's just how it looked, and just the feel and atmosphere, and then Dennis Hopper trying to explain to people, and then I loved everything about it. I just think it was a little bit too comedic in certain elements, but I think that's probably how they wanted to make it. But I absolutely love it, especially when Dennis Hopper finds Franklin, and then the flashlight turns on and turns off. It's just I really love Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Do I like it more than 3? No, but I like
what?
it. I do.
Would you repeat yourself, sir?
I do not like it more than 3.
Kick him out of here. Kick him out of here.
Wow.
Later,
Wow.
Al.
I'm really no. We like unpopular opinions. I and this isn't necessarily the show for that opinion to be, really analyzed. But I got to say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3, until very recently, was my least favorite TCM. That second film called Leatherface is worse by any calculable measure. But that's the commercial Texas Chainsaw Massacre film. That's the one that gives me the heebie-jeebies watching it.
I love 3. I mean, honestly, I love everything about it. I like, from the beginning. I love the actors in the movie. I just love it. I love the kills. I love the family. Ken Ford was awesome. I was rooting for him the whole time.
Even after he got killed and came back for no explained reason.
Yeah, I love the body.
Like a third character in a Jaws sequel. He gets eaten but comes back. Yeah.
I love the body pits and that whole element. They're driving, on the highway, and the troopers are there, and they're uncovering the body pits, and they're like, we got 40, 50 bodies, and they're taking out the skulls and the spinal cords. I really love Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3. RA did a good job as Leatherface. I really can't say nothing bad about it. Maybe there's things that could have been done better, but I really love. I revisit it a lot. Part 3, I really like it.
I just mourn David Chow's screenplay, which would have been the film that I would have wanted made. But we got what we got. But let's go back to Texas Chainsaw 2. Jonathan, what's your experience with this movie?
Dude, I love Texas Chainsaw 2. I mean, it's a very close second to the original film for me. And I think Tobe Hooper did the correct thing. He didn't try to remake Chainsaw 1. He went in the exact opposite direction. A lot more campy. I mean, well, not necessarily campy, but a lot more comedy in it. Gore ramped up, to 1,000. I love the characters, Chop Top, Stretch. I can't think of Dennis Hopper's name. Just crazy Dennis Hopper.
Lefty and right.
Lefty and right.
Yeah. But no, that film is fantastic. The weakest part of the whole film to me is actually Leatherface.
I can see that, actually.
Bill did okay. I thought Bill did pretty good.
I mean, the mask is just all wrong, and I guess you could make the argument it's somebody else's face now, but
it feels like a mask, though. It doesn't feel like human flesh.
Yeah. It screams Tom Savini.
Yeah.
But Bill Moseley as Chop Top just overshadowed the Leatherface character for me entirely.
Yeah.
So Piz, what is your feelings in brief?
Oh gosh, I mean, what's not to love about Chainsaw 2? I mean, it's what I love about it is the cook has taken his special recipe chili national.
Yes.
And he's winning the Texas Oklahoma chili cook-offs, and everybody's eating his chili.
On the meat.
Yeah. Don't skip on the meat. It's just a hard pepper shell core.
It's not a molar.
Yeah. I mean, what is there not to love about it? It's got everything that you could possibly want. It's ultra gory. It's over the top. Dennis Hopper is just out of his gourd the entire time. I mean, it created, Chop Top is a horror icon because of it. And I don't know. I like that Leatherface at this point is kind of like the he's going through that awkward phase where You know, he's starting to notice girls, and he gets a little funny feeling around Lefty.
Sex or the Saw.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, like that scene with her in the big thing with the beer cans, and he's touching her crotch with his chainsaw. Very, you know, what the heck is there not to love about the movie?
So this is gonna sound like absolute heresy to you guys, perhaps, maybe not. You know what the weakest peg? I love the movie, by the way, love it. But you know what I think the weakest peg of it is? The special effects.
What?
The stuff like when the chainsaw is run through Lefty at the end, it looks like a special effect. It looks very much like a mid-'80s latex and, you know, a goo special effect. And the first film is so great about not having that aspect.
Mhm.
So if there's anything that I would change, I would just get it to feel a little dirtier. But I do love the soundtrack, on the other hand.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's amazing to hear the
great
Cramps
sound.
and the Fleshtones and all those bands coming together. That it feels like what an alternative rock station would be playing in Texas in the mid-'80s, and that somehow that perfectly fits.
Chain.
Yeah,
So
it fits Tobe Hooper at that moment.
It's got a very punk rock aesthetic to it as well.
Shame
And
on you.
it's fast, it's harsh. There's only 3 chords in it, but that's all you need.
Yeah.
And it just works. It just works.
I did want to ask you guys, what do you think about the unreleased sequel by Tony Hooper, The
Never
All
wanna see it
American
released.
Massacre?
I mean, I'd love to see it, but I don't think it's ever going to happen.
It looks like it was shot on consumer grade videotape to me, and I don't see how it's going to enhance the legacy. So I kind of wish it would just stay where it is.
I just kind of want to see more Chop Top. I mean, even if it did come out, it's not like it's going to be a large release or anything. I just kind of want to see what they decided to do with that character, because I think like the premise of it with Chop Top in prison is interesting.
Yeah, I think the premise was interesting. I don't know if, you know, I don't know. If that thing was going to happen, I think it would have happened a long time ago. It is funny though, because there was a All American Massacre Instagram account that they had to shut down for some reason. I'm not sure why.
It was never authorized. They never had the rights to make
it
the film.
was. Yeah, well, that's true too. Yeah. So I don't know what. I just don't think it's ever going to happen.
You have to remember that when that project started, basically the idea was Natural Born Killers meets Texas Chainsaw Massacre
Right.
Part 2.
Right.
And that sounds pretty okay in theory, but I think the movie itself would have to be done with absolute care. And the fact that they've tried to jumpstart it with Kickstarter campaigns or fundraise, I don't know if it was Kickstarter, but you know, some form of crowdfunding, and they've just never been able to get this thing done.
No, I mean, it was filmed, what, mid-'90s or something?
Yes. Probably. I think it
Late
was
90s?
late 90s when I first heard about it.
Yeah. I just think it might be better. But everyone knows my take on it. I want to see new properties that we love. So kind of like, I don't see what this is going to do to enhance how we feel about Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. I just don't see it. Now, I could be wrong. The film could come out and be brilliant, and I will love to eat my words. I just don't see it.
Yeah.
No, I don't have a really good strong argument for it being brilliant.
And I mean, it wasn't finished. So I mean, they'd have to go back and complete it. And we're talking about there's a 20-something year gap. You know what I mean? So I don't know how they would do that unless they just reshot the whole thing.
So for the next 4 years, Tobe Hooper basically worked in television, doing things like episodes from Amazing Stories and The Equalizer and Freddy's Nightmares.
God, I love Amazing Stories.
And clearly he worked for whatever budget was available to those television projects. And sometimes it worked out well. Sometimes it worked out better than it should have. And sometimes it didn't work out very well at all. But he kept working. That's one thing that's a theme here. You'll notice there's no big gap, really, in this man's filmography. He was always getting work until basically the end of the 90s. So he had the better part of 3 decades where he was just working. And maybe they weren't all passion projects, and maybe they weren't all working with the material he would have preferred, but he worked. And that says a lot in an industry, whereas if you fail once, sometimes you're just gone. He'd stumbled several times commercially and was still standing. In 1990, for a budget, he puts out what would ultimately be his last theatrical release of a domestic Tobe Hooper film, Spontaneous Combustion. Well, there's a caveat to that. But Spontaneous Combustion is a film that always looked like it was padded because they didn't choose to put the budget in place. There's a lot that I kind of like about the movie, but it feels like the producers and the budget really let Tobe down. It feels like the Firestarter sequel that we didn't get, but it feels abandoned in some ways. How do you guys feel about it?
I agree. I think that movie starts out really strong, like really strong. That movie starts out really well. And as it goes along, it just kind of falls apart. And it looks like a movie that was abandoned and pieced together roughly in the editing room. And it's a shame because, I mean, Brad Dourif is good. There's some good things in it. It just, I don't know. Overall, it's a mess, though.
I agree. But there is a lot of style, especially in those early sequences.
Oh, of course, yeah. It starts off so good. I mean, when I revisited it, I forgot how well it started off. And then to watch it just sort of spin out of control and where it ends, exactly. It's rough, yeah.
How about you guys?
I've never seen it.
Yeah, same here, guys. Same here, Lauren.
It's really too bad because you've got Brad Dourif.
The elements were all there.
The elements were all there. It just, something, a screw came loose and it went off the rails,
I feel like at some point they cut the budget on it, and the time, it wasn't that they cut any scenes necessarily. It's that they had to keep getting to the next shot because of time. Because it feels like a lot of first takes, and it feels like they used every inch of film they shot for certain sequences rather than edit it really into shape just to make sure it was feature length. It probably would work better as a short film than it does as a feature, which is a little unfortunate. The same year, he makes a made-for-cable movie called I'm Dangerous Tonight, starring Tony Perkins and Machen Amick, who was really popular at the time from Twin Peaks. It's a weird film. It's a slight film, and it feels very much like what it is, a made-for-cable programmer. But it's not bad. It's just, it feels kind of like the first time we're feeling like maybe Tobe phoned in a little bit, maybe? How do you guys feel?
I really like it. I
Really?
really like I'm Dangerous Tonight. I really wish it would get like a Blu-ray release or even a DVD release. I wouldn't say I think Tobe phoned it in. I think Tobe lived within the means, within the confines of a television movie. But that's not saying that I don't think it still has that Tobe Hooper style to it. Anthony Perkins is very good in it. Machen Amick is very good in it. Dee Wallace is in there. I think it's a very solid TV movie, but I think it's Tobe living within the means and the confines of a television movie, but doing so well.
Al?
I actually, from what Piz said, it sounds good. Sounds like it has a stellar cast, but I have not seen it.
It used to be on YouTube. A really rough version of it used to be on YouTube.
I think it's on Tubi right now, if nothing else.
Okay.
I would definitely find it where you're not paying anything serious for it, because it's going to definitely be an acquired taste, simply because it feels like a 1990 TV movie, which, your mileage will vary on that. Jonathan, have you seen I'm Dangerous Tonight?
No, I'm useless until body bags. So,
well, we're almost there. We just have one stop before that. For myself, I found I'm Dangerous. I didn't have cable. So I'm Dangerous Tonight came to me in VHS a few years after its release. Obviously, they knew how to sell the film. They put Machen Amick in a red dress on the cover, which there was no way I wasn't renting that in 1993 or whatever it was. I don't have bad memories of the film. I think that that's a long walk from Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Eaten Alive or certainly Lifeforce to I'm Dangerous Tonight. So, The Mangler. The Mangler is an interesting film because it does receive a slight theatrical release. Played a lot of midnight showing. It had about a 1 week where it was out before it just evaporated. It was one of the quickest films out of theaters ever, mostly because it was not very well received. It's a weird film, too, because it was trying to bankroll its entire release on Robert Englund's presence. And Robert Englund is uncharacteristically completely chewing the scenery. Not in a way like Freddy, whereas it's kind of in the mood of the movie. He almost seems like he's in a completely different movie than the rest of the movie around him. He's so bigger than life. But again, it's a movie about a haunted folding press. And he might have had the right idea.
The title is just so much better than that film.
I don't understand. I mean, who read that short story and went, that's going to be our next theatrical release? You know what I mean? Like, I don't get it. I don't get. Now, let me preface this by saying, I love The Mangler.
In what way do you love The Mangler?
I love The Mangler. Take out the killer laundry press. Take that out. I don't even like to acknowledge that there's a killer laundry press in this
That's
movie.
the main attraction.
No. That's not the main attraction at all. I love Robert Englund's performance. First and foremost, I love Robert Englund's performance. The movie's got that just crazy off the wall Tobe Hooper vibe to it, and to me it's very. There's a shot in that movie that I love so much, where Ted Levine he's with the photographer guy who's dying. He's laying on the ground. The photographer bolts up into frame and spits blood on the camera lens. The blood's rolling down the lens. It's this beautiful shot of this dying old man with blood rolling down the lens. And that to me is such a Tobe Hooper thing. And the movie looks and feels like a Tobe Hooper movie. And that's one of the things that I love about it. It's off the wall. It's crazy. It's zany. Robert Englund's performance is worth the price of admission alone, in my opinion. I don't know. Whenever I watch that movie, I just always find myself with like a smile on my face. I really enjoy The Mangler.
So there's one vote for The Mangler. What about you guys?
It's been a while, Warren, but I remember I have to revisit it. But I remember I liked it. It's been a while, but I liked it.
I am not a Mangler fan.
It's very grim. It's very bleak. I don't know. There's just so much about it that I do like. I mean, I look at that movie and I go, that's a Tobe Hooper movie. And I think The Mangler may be the last movie that he did that you can say that is a Tobe Hooper movie there.
Oh, see, I'm going to disagree with that because I have one of my absolute favorite of his catalog coming up.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I revisited it either last night or the night before.
We'll get to it in a moment. But so I was one of those people that saw it as a midnight movie on release day. And I remember that the people who showed up, it was all people wearing punk rock and metal shirts, hanging out with their girlfriends. It was a party atmosphere. People were smuggling in as much alcohol as popcorn was bought at the concession stand. It was absolutely, it was Rocky Horror on acid because everyone was just hyped for this movie for some reason. I don't know if it was Tobe Hooper doing another King adaptation, if it was the haunted laundry press movie, let's have a party. I don't know what it was, but the film had all the goodwill in the world on the way in. And about half an hour in, people started filing out. And I knew I wasn't loving the movie, but at least I was staying. It's a weird movie, and it's weird to think that it's gotten like special edition releases because when it came out, it was pretty hated. It was pretty reviled.
Yeah. I remember seeing trailers and TV spots for the movie when it was first coming out. I remember reading reviews on the film when it was first coming out, and those reviews were vicious. And And I have to admit, I reading about the plot, it's like a killer laundry press. What were they thinking? Like, seriously, they made this of Stephen King's catalog, even the stuff that's not been made, even the deeper dives. You went for a killer laundry press? Like, what were you thinking? But then I saw it on like Cinemax one night, and I freaking loved it.
Well, Cinemax is probably the place to see it, though. So let's go real quick through this next one, because I think we all want to go real quick through this next one. 1999, he makes The Apartment Complex.
I've not seen it because that one's very difficult to find.
Never seen it. You skipped one of my favorites.
I don't think I did. What do you think I skipped?
Body Bags.
So Body Bags technically comes next. Just on release. At least on my notes it does. We'll get to it next, I promise you.
Okay.
So have none of you seen Apartment Complex?
I don't. The only Tobe Hooper movie that I'm 100% sure I've not seen is Night Terrors, because I can't find it anywhere. I may have seen Apartment Complex many years ago, but I know it's another one that's very difficult to find because I couldn't find it to rewatch it.
Well, Night Terrors is sort of a Tobe Hooper name-only project, but unfortunately, Apartment Complex is the dullest thing you're ever going to see. I have no idea why it is what it is, but it's not something you want to search out. There's a reason it's probably as obscure as it's become. But it's out there. You can find it, but I just don't recommend trying too hard. You don't want to ruin a weekend. Make it a weeknight movie. And then Body Bags, specifically the I segment, which was directed by Tobe Hooper. This was a video store staple in a big way, this title. A lot of people saw it on cable. A lot of people rented it. It did very well because of the John Carpenter connection. What do you guys think of Body Bags?
Go ahead, Jonathan. You've been waiting for it.
Man, I love Body Bags. But I'm a big time sucker for anthology films, especially those mid-90s ones. And I'm a little disappointed, even though it blew past me completely, that it wasn't a show like they intended it. I would have loved to have seen a Tales from the Crypt style episodic series like that, and bring in Tobe Hooper, John Carpenter, Wes Craven, all of them. I think Craven's even makes a cameo in the movie.
He does.
But all three of those stories are great. And it's just kind of been left to the times up until recently.
For some reason, I can't not forget Wes Craven's one line of dialogue in Body Bags. He goes, "Pack of Cordales, please." That's it.
And he's just all disheveled. And he's
yeah. He still looks enough like Wes Craven. You're like, that's Wes Craven. Come on, you can mess up his hair a little, but it's still Wes Craven.
It's interesting because I do think it's one of those films that they were going for the EC Comics vibe, and there've been enough things like it recently. Whether you're talking about not so much Tales from the Dark Side, but Monsters had a heavy EC Comics vibe, and you had Tales from the Crypt, and then you have Body Bags, and I think there might have been a lot like it out, in recent years. So
yeah,
I think.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think it's just one of those things that I think it just fell into that trap of too much at the same time. Because I do think it's better than most of its surroundings.
Yeah, I would have just liked to have had that second, outlet where you could do, kind of hard R stuff, not like Tales from the Dark Side and Monsters and the Friday the 13th TV show, all that stuff, where it was kind of held back because it was in syndicated television. Yeah,
well, the Friday the 13th television series literally got canceled because of a boycott campaign because of the harder stuff they tried to pull off.
Really?
It was the number 2 rated syndicated show on television at the time of getting canceled.
I've never watched it. So
the first 2 seasons are awesome. The 3rd season has its moments, but check out the first 2 seasons. It's very, very good.
I have all 3 seasons. I just, how it goes. You accumulate stuff and you just don't watch it.
the big problem with the third season is the cast had changed, and it just doesn't have the chemistry it had before.
Is it the dude from I hate to derail this, but isn't the dude from Jason Goes to Hell in the series?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's as good as he is in Jason Goes to Hell, he's better in the television series. Like that character is just it's a classic character, television character, period. And obviously, Roby is amazing because she's Roby. I wouldn't call her a great thespian necessarily, but I'd say she's perfectly adequate for that series.
Yeah.
So who wants to talk about Crocodile?
I do want to mention for body bags. I think Toby's segment is the best of the three. I think it's really well done. I think Mark Hamill's really good in it. I think it's the best of the three, hands down.
It's the most well done, I believe. My personal favorite's Hair. I just love Stacy Keach with just like Fabio mane.
I think all three of the stories are good, and I think John Carpenter's good in the wraparound. But I don't know. It's when I first saw The Eye, I mean, it just hit me different than because the first two kind of had they were a little tongue in cheek kind of, but then The Eye was just really sort of straightforward and and
then it was pretty much ripped off in that Jessica Alba movie, like in the mid 2000s.
Well, that was a remake of
a Japanese film, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, that was after Body Bags, so they ripped that off.
Yeah. Al, anything on Body Bags?
Have not seen it, guys.
It's a lot of fun. Al, you should look into it. Scream Factory released it a few years ago. I think it's still in print.
Yeah, that release is really cheap too. It's like $13 on Amazon.
It's worth it.
Lance is asking about Night Terrors. Yeah, Night Terrors is a thing.
I've never seen it because it's difficult to find. And I heard such bad things about it that back in the day when it was at the video store, even though I was a big Tobe Hooper fan, I just didn't want to watch it.
Hey guys, I hate to break everything up. I got a little kid to put to bed, so
okay, man.
All right.
Take care, John.
Thank you, Jonathan.
See you, bud.
Appreciate it. So moving on, which might be the best move, Crocodile. Direct to video.
I have not seen it. It's not, Lauren. I'm not getting this confused. It's not Alligator with the one in the sewers.
Oh no.
Okay.
John Sayles.
I've seen Alligator 1 and 2, but
pretty amazing. Crocodile is very Crocodile.
I love Crocodile.
Do you?
I love it. It is like it's like a cheesy slasher movie, but instead of a guy in a mask, you've got a big mechanical crocodile. And you still have the crazy characters that you would find in any Tobe Hooper movie. It's not quite as stylish as Tobe's other stuff, but it's still got that. There's just something off about it.
Crocodile. Man.
I love it. I love it.
That CGI and then close up prosthetic crocodile is wow. It's not good.
No.
It's very of all of his work, it's probably the most of its time in a bad way. It was that time period where the computer graphics had taken over and they had the templates of certain animals, sharks and crocodiles mostly, in place, but they hadn't mastered shadows under those creatures or anything like that. So they always look like color forms on the screen, but it's again, Tobe was working and the budgets had fallen off huge. He wasn't going to get another theatrical release domestically. I'm glad that he was able to work, and I own the DVD. I bought it when it came out. I was excited. Tobe Hooper making a film about a killer crocodile. I'm in. It's just something you need to watch as junk food.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's not a great movie by any stretch, but I find it highly entertaining.
Next, we come to what. Yeah, I've sounded pretty negative for a little while now, I realize, but on the next title, I guarantee I'll be the most positive of the bunch. 2004's Toolbox Murders. I think is a complete return to form in every conceivable way. If this had been what he followed his canon years with, I think that we probably would have gotten a second renaissance of theatrical Tobe Hooper. And it breaks my heart that this film was not embraced to get the wide release and the audience that it deserved, because it is, I think, an incredibly tight film that is a remake in name only. It is not a remake of the original film called Toolbox Murders. And, thank God it's not, because it's bold. It has lots of ideas. It looks gorgeous. It has some good performances. I think Toolbox Murders is one of Tobe Hooper's best films. And it's kind of in the sea of mediocrity of the last few years for him, and certainly what came later. So I love Toolbox Murders. What do you guys think?
I remember renting it when it first came out. I was super excited because it was Tobe Hooper, and he was doing. I just figured it was going to be a slasher movie, just a Tobe Hooper slasher movie. Okay, I'll take it. And I did not like it at all, and I'd completely forgotten just about everything about it until I rewatched it again, either last night or the night before, and it's much better than I remember it being. I don't love it, but it's a lot better than some stuff that came before it, and much better than a lot of the stuff that came after it from Tobe Hooper. Good cast. You got Angela Bettis. A lot of familiar faces. I'm not sure their names, but a lot of familiar faces in the cast also. Kind of a supernatural slasher. But yeah, I think the second time around, I thought it was better than it sort of had any right to be, because it just kind of seems like what they wanted from it was just a straight to video sleazy low budget slasher, and Tobe elevated it with his style. And again, it's so offbeat and weird also. I enjoyed it the second time around.
That's another one I have to see. I haven't seen it, guys.
You can rent it on Amazon Prime for $3.99 or buy it for $5.99. I just went ahead and bought it.
I really love the movie, and I think that it definitely should be seen by a lot more eyes. I think it's going to endure really well. I don't think it's going to suffer from being trapped in the time it was made. It feels more like a classic 70s, early 80s film. I actually would say aesthetically, it's more like the Funhouse, not in the sleaziness, but in how it's framed, how the story is told. It takes its time where it needs to take its time. It doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel half-assed. The ideas play. I really am a big fan of Toolbox Murders. I'm not a big fan of Mortuary, his next film.
Did I see? I think I seen it maybe once. I don't remember. Maybe a long time ago. I think I did. I have to revisit it.
Well, you can. It's literally a title that you can find on those 15 horror movies for $10 collection.
Mm-hmm.
It's available everywhere. I think Tubi's had it forever. If you want to see it with the same ad 6 times in a row between commercial breaks.
Yeah. I really wanted to like Mortuary. It's a difficult film to like. I actually had a conversation with a guy who worked behind the scenes on that movie, and there's an obvious reason why. I won't go into it, but live at least. But Tobe was not, according to this person, he was not
in a good place.
In a good place making this movie.
Yeah, it's missable. I mean, as horror fans, we want to be completist, and we want to say we've seen the entire oeuvre of every horror director who's made a classic film. But
what was that again? Pronounce that again.
Oeuvre.
Oeuvre. I always got the oeuvre.
Oh.
You
may be right. You may be right.
I don't know.
My
it doesn't
French
matter.
might be off.
I love that word, though. I love that word.
Yeah, but but it's one of those films that I think you almost, if you come across it, watch it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not gonna point anyone away from it, because some people did work hard to make any movie, right?
Right.
But I think there's better uses of your time, and probably will help your view of Hooper's entire catalog if you just kind of skip it.
Yeah, that one was clearly, I think that was just like, you want to pay me to direct a movie? Okay.
Yep.
You know.
So from there, Tobe gets 2 episodes of Masters of Horror. Damn Thing and Dance of the Dead. And that series, I was never the hugest fan of Masters of Horror. I felt there was a lot of missed opportunities in that series. But it was nice to see these guys get money for short films, basically. That's how I don't even like think of it as a television series. I like the fact that they put the individual discs out initially, because that's really the spirit of it. It doesn't work as a show, but as short films, it kind of does. I think both of his episodes are good, but I would say that again, you have to look at it for what it was. That's the fair thing. I think outside of John Carpenter's Cigarette Burns, which was unbelievably good for where John Carpenter was in his career, this is Tobe Hooper working on a budget, doing what he was expected to do in some ways, and doing it well, but it doesn't feel like it has the inventive spirit of his early years, certainly. Still, it would ultimately, those episodes would serve as really the true cap of his career, even though there is one film left to go. What do you guys think about his Masters of Horrors episodes?
I liked both episodes, or both short films, whatever you want to call them. I thought Dance of the Dead was the second one, right? That was season 2, right?
Yes, I believe.
I do like.
Don't quote me on that.
I do like that one better. I think they're both solid, but again, yeah, I wasn't a huge. I mean, on paper, we should all be loving Masters of Horror because Tobe Hooper, John Carpenter, Dario Argento, Don Coscarelli, all the big names are making these short films, and not just the directors, but the writers were also big name horror writers. And I don't know if it was the budgets or what, they just all kind of felt hamstrung. They all just kind of felt, I don't know, they could have been more than what they were. But I do like both of Tobe Hooper's Masters of Horror episodes or short films, whatever you want to call them.
I just prefer to they are episodes, but I prefer to think of them as short films. I think it's more helpful to the individual creators to think of it that way, because I do think they're more substantial than just, they directed an episode of Tales from the Dark Side in the third season.
Yeah.
It's more than that. So to me, it's a little bit saner. But that said, like, if we're going to talk about someone like Dario Argento, Jennifer is something I don't like. And I'll even take like The Card Player is Sleepless over that, simply because I feel like they're more complete, if not successful. Mm-hmm. So it was a weird format. It worked for some people better than others.
Yeah. Maybe it was just the format. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just everything all put together. But yeah, I don't know. Your Cigarette Burns is a great one. I enjoyed Don Coscarelli's. What was the one? Like
Incident Off a Mountain.
Yeah. Argento.
Joe R. Lansdale short story.
Yeah, Argento did 2. I know the one I didn't like Jennifer. He did one called Pelts too.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything about it, but I seem to recall liking it. It sticks out in my mind. And Stuart Gordon did one. I don't remember what it's called, but I remember liking it too.
He did Dreams in the Witch House, didn't he?
I think that was. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I know it was Stuart Gordon's,
which was barely a Lovecraft adaptation again. That was his thing. He barely adapted Lovecraft whenever he could.
He's Mr. Lovecraft, but he just barely, he is.
And the irony there is then, like, he makes a film called Dagon, which you're like, oh, he's going to do that short story. That's awesome. And he doesn't. Mm-hmm. That's Shadow over Innsmouth. So it's like, and that's the closest of his adaptations, and it has the wrong title.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I will tell you that, and Jacob brings it up here, I preferred Fear Itself. It's weird because on paper that shouldn't have worked at all, because you're taking Masters of Horror, porting it over to network television, where obviously there'd be more limitations. But those episodes actually worked with the limitations, I felt, a little bit better. And part of that is kind of my problem with what I call premium television, standards, which is like, got to get that moment of nudity and you got to get your one gore effect. And it almost, after a while, felt very formulaic, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas on network television, you couldn't do those things, so you had to just figure out other things to do. So Fear itself was a better series for me.
I didn't see any of the Fear itself because I was like, Masters of Horror on cable television, it's not going to work. So I didn't watch any of them.
I think you should check it out. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Not every episode, but I think you'll be, on the whole, pleasantly surprised. And I know I always mention it. If we're going to talk about television series, anthology television series, everyone go to YouTube, find episodes of Darkroom with James Coburn, and watch the whole season. It was only on the air for 1 year. I really believe it is the best anthology television show in the horror genre history. I think it's better than the original Twilight Zone, not even by a little bit, to be honest. If you love things like the Halloween season, if you love going to things like Spirit Halloween, which are a little bit plastic, a little bit fake, but make you feel like a kid again, you can't not love Darkroom.
Darkroom. Let me write that down.
Darkroom is amazing. Amazing. And there is absolutely no Tobe Hooper connection there. So what we will notice is that Toby's working a whole lot less often now. And rather than always having, a couple spoons stirring the pot, he's waiting for the jobs to come to him more. In 2013, he gets an opportunity to direct a film in the United Arab Emirates called Jinn. And I have weird feelings about Jinn. Obviously, the special effects are awful. I mean, just awful. And they derail the film. There's no way around the fact that all these wonderful moments of suspense and tension get built up to be absolutely spoiled and squandered by horrifically bad special effects. And what's worse is that since then, a bunch of films from Muslim nations have come out that have been so superlative that it makes Jinn feel even smaller and clumsier. It does have some good acting in it. That's the strongest aspect of this film. I think he worked really well with his actors. But it's again a film that I think it's safer to miss if you want to hold Tobe on the pedestal that he deserves to be on.
I agree. I saw Jinn. The special effects are just ridiculously bad. There are some good atmospheric moments in it, as I recall. But it seems like all the atmospheric moments are punctuated by just awful special effects. And to me, it didn't look. I kind of equate it to The Ward, even though The Ward I think is a much better movie. It didn't look or feel like a Tobe Hooper movie to me the same way that The Ward didn't look or feel like a John Carpenter movie to me. But yeah, not. Yeah, you said it pretty. You said it best. Just kind of let's not acknowledge that Jinn exists.
I haven't seen it.
And it's sad because I think the idea is solid. And I think that there was a chance for this to be a return to form. Again, this could have been the third life of Tobe Hooper, but it just, again, I don't know if it was budget or just resources in this case, because it actually looks like a fairly expensive film when it wants to. And then those special effects happen and you realize that it's not.
Yeah.
But a lot of the technical credits, the lighting, the set design, they're all very good. But it just can't pull itself away from the cheesy special effects. And the climax doesn't work. That doesn't help. So it kind of leaves you with a bad taste in your mouth. So we've gone through the whole Tobe Hooper film catalog, some of his television work. I didn't want to go through every episode of everything he did. Because I think that becomes a distraction almost. He's a director that I feel doesn't get his credit because for the first couple decades of his career, even when he failed in a way that was immensely pleasurable.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like many directors of his age, the money stopped and the opportunities stopped, and he had to work within confines that were unfortunate for anyone to have to work in. But I still think that we're so much better off for having had him, even when he was quote unquote slumming, than not having him. And I worry that we're not developing those kind of legacy directors and creators today, like your Tobe Hoopers, like your John Carpenters.
We definitely aren't.
So I think that makes me celebrate him even more, even in his darkest moments. Because I'll tell you what, there's a million things wrong with Lifeforce, for instance. There just is. But everything that's wrong about the film is vital and feels alive, and it feels punk rock, and it feels like it has a voice. And these films were created by human hands, not by machines. And you could see love and hard work and devotion and giving a shit, which is something I'm seeing less and less of. Tobe Hooper might have been the quintessential punk rock filmmaker, even though he came from the hippie generation.
Yeah.
And I miss him. I really do.
I think we all do.
Not because I ever expected him to produce anything of the quality of his early work again, but because he was always an interesting watch, even when he failed.
Mm.
And that, I know Piz in particular hates the words guilty pleasures. I don't, because I do think it's an important distinction. He says he doesn't feel guilty, but here's the thing. Either do I. I'm just trying to say, hey, I like it for different reasons. Even the guilty pleasures from Tobe Hooper have a greater value than most of the horror films that came out the same year as he released things. And I think, as sad as it is to say, in 30 years, people are going to look back at the early part of his career and still see them as vital works.
Mm-hmm.
I think the films that came out last year in the genre, or the early part of this year before the apocalypse, will not be viewed that way.
No, not at all.
So Al, before we just do a little bit of housekeeping here, what are your final thoughts on the career of Tobe Hooper?
Well, like you said earlier, Lauren, he's missed. I know we all miss him. The whole horror community, the whole horror world misses Tobe Hooper, and that's life. As far as what he will always be remembered by when you bring up the name Tobe Hooper is, and as many good movies as he's done, as many bad movies as he's done, I think he's always going to be remembered in people's hearts and horror fans' hearts for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And he created an absolute masterpiece that will never, ever be done again. And it's going to stand the test of time. 100 years from now, when we're all dead and buried,
I'll be alive.
Oh, well,
I won't be alive in 2 weeks. Don't fool yourself.
people are going to always, generations that, that's what he's going to be remembered for, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because there's no other horror movie ever like it. And there will never, ever, ever be another horror movie like the original, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Well said. Piz, your final thoughts on, although I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about him in the future, your final thoughts for tonight on Tobe Hooper.
Well, I think if Tobe had only done Chainsaw Massacre, he'd still be considered, a brilliant filmmaker. He'd still be on the horror Mount Rushmore. But I think it's unfortunate that there's we were talking about it before we went live. The first half of his career it's front loaded. That's for sure. But there's a lot of really good movies beyond Texas Chainsaw Massacre that should be watched and should be celebrated. Movies like, there's a reason why Lifeforce today is considered a classic. People didn't get it at the time. Now it's considered a freaking classic,
an exploitation classic. I agree.
Yeah. And that legacy will only live on, or will only grow as time, progresses. I think he was a really good filmmaker. I think he had a unique vision. I think he brought an energy and again, just this oddball aesthetic. All of his films, there's just something off about them, but in such a good way. I don't know. I've always considered him to be a great filmmaker, even in the twilight of his years, even when the quality of the work was not anywhere near the beginning of his career. I don't know. It felt comforting knowing that Tobe Hooper was there, and now that he's gone, it's kind of left a big void. I think he was one of the most unique filmmakers that the genre had to offer, and now he's gone. And unfortunately, in the later part of his career, the audience was kind of gone too.
So I feel like there's two distinct periods in Tobe Hooper's career. There was the prime era where he was getting theatrical releases and the work was always fascinating and was, even when the critics hated it, was taken seriously. And then I feel like something changed. And I think it happened in media in general. Right around 1990, we got comfortable with the idea of watching films in the genre from our armchairs, being a little bit too comfortable in our seats. And Tobe Hooper was never a filmmaker who wanted you to be comfortable. He didn't always want you to be disgusted or terrified, but he had a range of emotions he wanted to give you, and it was best explored in a darkened theater with a group of your peers. And while I talk about going to see, his spontaneous combustion with a theater full of, like-minded horror fans, and yes, a lot of them bolted out of the theater, it was still the right environment. After we got past that and he was working in television or on straight to video or for cable or for the United Arab Emirates, his audience just was not where he needed them to be. I think he was a unique creator. And as I've said a million times in this broadcast, I think that we're worse off for not having a structure to support his vision and get it out the way that he would be best appreciated. I miss Tobe Hooper for the same reason I miss Val Lewton. Because these men had vision. And they had a unique take on what could have been just pure schlock. Texas Chainsaw Massacre on paper is nothing special. It's that texture we discussed. It's that feeling, that mood, that end of the world aesthetic. Eaten Alive doesn't basically have a plot. But watching the film, you're just drenched in a fever dream of Louisiana bio that feels as dangerous as any film you'll ever see. Invaders from Mars brings us back to kind of a more innocent era of filmmaking, but still manages to set our teeth on edge. Everywhere in his career, we have films that deserve a deeper look until the industry fails him. And I think an entire generation of filmmakers were failed by the industry. Let's not let that happen again, guys. Please, if you like someone's work, and we do have people in the chat screaming out names of directors they think today could have this legacy. I'm heartened to hear that. Please support these artists. Don't wait for it to show up on Netflix for free. Buy their films. It's the only way we guarantee we get more. And maybe physical media won't be with us forever. It won't be. Spoilers. But you can still directly contribute when these things hit pay-per-view. Please do that, because that's the only way we're going to have another generation that even approximates the power of Tobe Hooper and his peers. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. It was a ball. It was kind of a chaotic day, so I do appreciate the last-minute help from Jonathan Lundy and from Al. I want to go over a little bit of housekeeping with you, but first I want to share something I did today. I went back to the movie theater. No one else did.
Wow.
What were you watching?
A film called Tenet, which I believe is mostly a silent film. No, that's not true. I actually understood most of the dialogue. I could discuss Tenet at length, but all I'll say is that the best things about Nolan are the worst things about Nolan. Thank you for having someone who takes cinema seriously and wants to make intelligent action films. On the other hand, there's a reason action films exist in the box they do. So it's like the things I love about him are also the things that I kind of regret about him. But I do recommend if you can get out to see it though. It's a serious piece of filmmaking. It's a longer film. But I made it out to the theater. It was completely safe, clearly. It was basically like being in my living room, the biggest living room on the planet. But please, guys, get out there. If you feel comfortable and safe, get out there and enjoy it. If not, wait till it does hit some pay service and get out there and support this stuff. On the channel, coming up on Saturday, we have our community show at 2 p.m. I will post the link if you want to join and be a voice on Visited by Voices. You can have your say. It's always a raucous time. On Monday, we have the return of Critical Pursuit, the game show. Hey, Piz, will we be seeing you on Monday?
Monday the 14th at 8? Possibly.
So can I sweeten the deal a little bit? So on Monday, I will not host the show. I will be a contestant. You'll be up against me.
Interesting. Who's going to be hosting?
Still working out the final details, but it will be a familiar face.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And then on Wednesday, September 16th, I'll be joined by Raiho Magnifico for a discussion on the state of the horror genre. So that's what's coming up on the channel. Right around the end of the schedule, we have something else that me and Piz will be doing. What's that called again, Piz?
The Sausage Factory? No, it's not that.
What was that?
I don't know. I think the show's called Region A Locked, maybe.
Region A Locked. Yeah. It probably should be.
Region Free is the show. Yes.
Yeah.
October 1st is the premiere of Region Free.
That is an exclusive on Visited by Voices Live
on the Region Free YouTube channel.
That is so. I'm very. Everyone on this channel knows that I'm very excited. I think that you're all going to love the new show. Everything you loved about the old show is going to be still in place, but we're raising the bar.
More me. It's just me. All me.
Well, when I say raising the bar, that means I get to stand on a few milk crates so that I'm as high as Piz. So we're going to play a few promos, then on the other side, we'll say our goodbyes, and we'll have a good night. Thank you all. Have a good night.
They make movies look bad.
What, where should I start? I saw this movie.